Hi, thank you for joining us for another session from the Affecting Destiny Vault. I'm so excited to share this with you as we heard so much from pastors and leaders when this was originally delivered. Naomi Dowdy is about to bring a word and a teaching to you about succession, legacy, leadership transition. She's a phenomenal woman of God who started a church in Singapore and raised it up to incredible heights, and then raised up a successor and turned it over to Pastor Dominic Yao. And under his leadership, that church has flourished, and from generation to generation, just great fruit and impact in the nation of Singapore and all over Southeast Asia. I've personally been privileged to be there, see that firsthand, minister there for them. It's an amazing, one of the best in the world stories of leadership transition in the kingdom. So when this session was delivered, it impacted so many pastors and leaders. No matter where you are in your leadership journey, I encourage you, grab a device, something to take notes on, get ready to receive some incredible wisdom from a great woman of God, Naomi Dowdy.
Greetings to all of you awesome leaders who are here for this Affecting Destiny Conference. Awesome. And to you, Bishop Tony Miller, great man of God whom I honor highly, a leader among leaders. I am so honored to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation, because I'm excited. I'm excited about this conference and its potential, because really the theme is very prophetic. Affecting destiny. That means that every one of you that are here, you're going to have such a life-transforming experience that it will literally enable you to affect destiny, not only in your life, but in many others. Okay, my topic today deals with a very critical topic, the topic that is often overlooked or neglected because we think, it'll not even address it because it doesn't affect me. But when it comes to planning for succession in ministry, succession in business, we're usually guilty of that proverbial kicking the can down through the years, assuming that, nothing is going to happen to me personally, it's going to be all right. But we have to first understand this, that when you personally choose to intentionally move to the next level in God, that is transitioning. That's succession. It's an intentional choice on your part. So succession is not about retirement. So when you ask yourself, well, okay, then I'll wait till I'm older. When do I really start on this? You start from day one. You have to start the process immediately when you come into ministry. Do you have them in place yet? No, but in your mind, you should be looking at reproduction. Now, I want you to notice carefully. Succession is not a matter of age. It doesn't matter if you are a young leader, just emerging leader, or you're a person that has been in ministry a long time, very experienced, you're pastoring a large and thriving church. It's not about our age. We're talking about stewardship. Note that down. We're talking about being good stewards of what God has entrusted to you and I. It's about recognizing the times and the seasons and being a good steward. It's not retirement. It's about legacy management. I want you to note that the best thing to do would be for you to buy my book. I have, you can go to Amazon or you can go to Kindle Reader. It's in both places. And then my book, which is called Moving On, Moving Up. And that I have several books by that title, but then the main title is From Succession to Significance. Significance. That's where you're moving from, into, is for that significance. But then the subtitle deals with, it's the practical principles for legacy management and leadership transition. Legacy management, I had never heard anyone write about up at that time, and I'm not sure if there's many books on it now, but there's something, this book will help you, and it will go into more details of what we're having. So as you get this book, I want you to read it and read it carefully. But let me give you a few things that are not in the book, that were 6 critical elements for successful succession. First of all, leadership training is very necessary. In other words, if you're going to transition and turn the baton over to somebody else, that means you need to develop a successor. So there's leadership development. So in order for you to move to that next level, that means you need to empower someone else so that they can build upon the legacy that you have already established. So it's not just about preparing somebody else. First, you prepare yourself. You must prepare and discern who is it, who has the right gifts, who has the right anointing to be able to accomplish what God has for your ministry, for your church, for your business, then take it further. Because why? You have sacrificed, you have poured your life into the church, you don't want it to become broken apart and destroyed and become ineffective in its latter years, because you know that God has put you there. You don't want all that God has used you to accomplish by His grace to now just drift off into nothingness after your season. No. This way, it's going to demand that you have an intentional development program for new emerging leaders. You have to know that your successor, you don't want them to be a hireling. You want them to be a son or daughter of the house. You don't want them to make old mistakes that you've made. You want them to make new mistakes. And that means in the process of that handing over, there should be honor for them to you and you for them. This is going to require then what? Intentional training and a mentoring process, because that identifying of your potential successor happens during this mentoring process. Your successor should be, and write it down, at least 20 to 25 years younger than you are. Now, reasons for that, and I cover them in my book, very detailed. But why? One of the reasons it's going to take you 8 to 10 years before you ever get a person really, if you do it well, bring them up to a level of possible selection out of the different pool that you would be working with. So you need to examine, first of all, what are your gifts? What is your anointing? What has God used in you? And then, once you know what God has used in you to build your church to where you are now you have to look around and say, okay, now, if someone were to pick up from me, what spiritual gifts and what skills would they need to be able to further develop and build upon what God has enabled me to accomplish thus far? So you need to examine that, and realize that if you miss this step, you will begin to select someone who, only will maintain. They cannot really build, they don't have the anointing, and ultimately then your ministry will slip into this maintenance mode rather than continuing to move forward. You want to, modern day, Bill Bright organization. There was no future planning for succession. He had an emergency. Suddenly he was out of the picture. Where's that minister today? I'm not criticizing. This is reality. And again, our dear Dr. Billy Graham just passed away. But that Billy Graham Association, several years ago, Billy gave it over to Franklin. Now, Franklin may be a good guy, but Billy, listen, Franklin does not have Billy's spiritual DNA. That's a reality. So there's not that same anointing. Therefore, don't you make the same mistake, okay? Now, a third other area is some fears we have to overcome, and also some pitfalls to watch out for. Let me just quickly give you a few of these, because one of them is, what will I do when I am not the senior pastor, the senior leader, or CEO anymore? So that's going to deal with my insecurity, my finances, my insurance, my acceptance, my inclusion, all of those emotional needs. Then another thing that could cause us is we've never planned, we've never expected that we would need to turn it over, that surely we would die in the pulpit preaching, right? Wrong thinking about that. But, we never prepare for it. Another is that we can also only focus on the ministry in our local church. And we want to see our local churches grow. But we never focus on anything outside or beyond. So what would we do? Then there's a lack on our part to personal growth. We do not have continued learning. You're here in this conference, that shows that you don't fall in that category. You want to continually learn. You want to position yourself. Now, if we turn it over, though, If we have not had continual learning, what do we have? Are we updated? Are we relevant? Will people invite us to come and be with them? We have another thing that sometimes hinders the new person is that after we have turned the baton over to them, now we want to continue to fill the pulpit. We can't do that. We can't preach that off. The new team has to take it on. So this is where your job is to also handle one very critical one. Since they are 20 to 25 years younger than you, you're junior, then that means that you will question, will the people accept a younger leader? That's your job, to convince people change, and that change is necessary, and the person's capable. Another thing, we can be fear of failure. We're comfortable doing things the way we're doing, but we're fear of the failure of something new, and it's not comfortable for us. Now, as those are some of the fears. Look at some of the pitfalls. Because one, do not assume that your kids would be the ones to take it over. Wonderful it is, but if they don't have the anointing, don't assume. Don't assume that the one with the most seniority would be the best one for it. Don't assume that. Don't assume that it's based only on one gender. And don't assume that it will be someone close to your age. I've already addressed that a little bit. It needs to be the age gap. Listen, in your eyes, you will never feel the new person is ready. Why? Because you have so many years of ministry. You have so much experience. And the other person, you never see them as your equal. They're always younger, less experienced. They won't know what to do. I know the problems that were ahead, so we need to shift in that because they will never be ready in your eyes. You have to really look and say, God, do they have it inside of them? Remember, you were at that age at one time. You made mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. We all do. But you must train them and trust them. You must dare to release to them, because it's only after you set them into place, only after you set them in, will they feel the weight of that responsibility. Only then will the weight and the heaviness and the carrying that mantle of a higher calling and anointing, they begin to feel it. It's only after they're selected and after they put in. I call this the metamorphosis process. It's a process of where they are developing. But don't, listen, after you pass it, don't rush in and cut their cocoon, okay? Because you can't rush in. They need that struggle. They need that development. It'll help them to be stronger. But it will make a difference if you let them, if you will say to them, God, you can do it. If you will encourage them and dare to believe in them, but don't cut the cocoon. They need that pressure, as I said, because if they don't develop that strength now in the beginning stages, their future success will be in jeopardy. Now, why and how do you do that? One of the things you need to know how to hear from God, you must prophetically see the unreleased potential that God has put in them before you select them. You have to discern what is inside of them. It's not fully developed, but yes, if with little time, prayer over them, they can be released. This is why it's very important, because it'll still take them after you turn the church over. After you give it to them, with all of your preparation, it will still take them at least 5 years before they really feel comfortable in the saddle. That's just a proven fact. Before they, in a sense, begin to feel that sense of identity that I'm doing, but now I feel comfortable in God's leading and anointing, and I can do this. Well, now let me ask you. What I'm talking about is this, is because survey shows that we're more likely to become disabled than to actually die during our working years. That's why there's a forgotten element in transitioning many times, and that element is what I call the emergency. Bill Bright's was an emergency. With Billy Graham, it was not an emergency. You see, this is why it's important that we say, God, what if? So it's like that inward security. They have to develop that and be able to feel competent. Then another area that is often a forgotten element is what I call the emergency situations. You know, the Bill Bright was an emergency situation. The Billy Graham was one that was able to play, able to be worked out. But look at this. Surveys say you're 7 times more likely to have a disability during your working years than you are to be able to just say, I just die, and therefore I can turn it over. It's a change. Now, that means that emergency, if you were to be disabled, hit by a car, on a bus, we have so many crazy things happening in our world today, and particularly strokes, I see so many of that. But an emergency then creates an emergency in your family, and it creates one in the church as well. So you need to ask yourself, do you have life insurance? Do you have accident insurance? Do you have disability insurance? Do you have a normal will? Do you have a living will? And the church, do they know? I mean, clearly spelled out, they know, not assume, who would immediately take charge if something were to happen to you. Because the other element is, what does the Constitution say? You see, there needs to be a very clear plan. Write it down, go over it with your board or elders and approve it. In fact, it's good to have every key member of your staff have that what-if situation for emergency, because they're more likely. This whole area of succession in the emergency is a real biggie for us today. Now, I saw all of this, and it became a reality to me when I had my hip surgery. I had to have a hip replacement, as some of you know. And when I did, I was at therapy, and there was older people, but I saw a lot of young men and young women there. Some of them had lost a leg. Some of them was dementia. Some of them were experiencing limbs that had been disabled because of accidents. There was just this process then for them to recover. It took a very long time, very painful long. The degree of recovery, it varied. It was not always the same. But we find that they could not really, it's not a fast process. It's going to take years, not months. So as good stewards, we need to plan properly, because we are stewards of God's church. The church is God's, not ours. And so we need to be good stewards in order to avoid the damage of internal strife, because people lose confidence in the situation because the leader has disappeared. That means that as you do make the decision and things begin to happen in transition, you need to prepare at multiple levels. This is very important, to prepare everyone. It's not just the top announces it. There needs to be a process of filtering that. Now remember, first of all, I must manage it, this whole event. This is managing a process of transition. It is not an event. So in order to have that, means that everyone is transitioning, and everyone should move up with God so that it is a win-win situation for everyone involved. Thus, I don't like the words to step down. I'd rather say we step aside so that others will be able to rise up. And my personal feeling and view for all apostolic leaders is that we need to be accountable. We need to be accountable for our actions and our decisions and our choices. Because I, as a leader, must personally hear from God. I must know in my spirit, and then I must share who I believe my successor will be. Then I need to also, after that, submit what I am hearing from God to my governing board. And the governing board now, they are going to have to take that, listen to why. Need to give my reasons, and they need to pray over it, and they need to come to that place that they can say, yes, this is God's plan for us in the future. Because I do not believe in an election process. This is a divine transition. So again, what does your Constitution say? Because that becomes very important in how the process can be done. Now, after the board, you need to explain your reasons and choices to your pastoral staff, because they need to pray over it. They need to begin to accept this direction with God's new leader. That means it's a critical step, because here is where peer acceptance comes in. If you have really grown up sons and daughters in the house, there are going to be a lot of peer levels. And so it's a peer acceptance, just like Elijah and Elisha. Young prophets were in the dorm. They needed to, what? Now acknowledge that Elijah was God's chosen one. That was a choice. Now it would seem that Elisha, you are at a different level than you were before. So we acknowledge God has put you in this position. So they needed to accept that new position of spiritual authority. Then from there, you move to the pastoral staff. You move, it's more of an announcement now, seeking their prayer support, seeking their cooperation so they can work together. Then the next level of just your small groups and ministry leaders, and then after those, the congregation. Again, this is announcing and ensuring them of what's happening and the affirmation of everyone, and that especially that God has spoken. So the whole process becomes a process of affirmation and a process of acceptance and anticipation of greater days that are ahead. Then you can find another example for that. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 5. Remember, whatever mission that Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul would give him a higher rank in the army. And this pleased all of the troops and all of the officers as well. Now, that's the kind of response you want. This is where you want to have that response from every level as you announce the potential new leader that is going to be your successor. Now, besides that, listen, if you have any staff who cannot accept God's new leader, it's your responsibility to help them leave, get out of the way before the transition actually takes place. That's where it comes to your most important step. You're releasing and moving on. God called you. God put gifts inside of your spirit. He has an anointing upon your life. Therefore, God's calling, God's gifts are still in you, even after you transition. It's not your title. Regardless of a title or no title, church or no church, business or no church, God's gifts are still in you. And God can still use those gifts. So we need to be able to say, God, that now, my question, God, is how can I use those? What will be the expression, God, of the gifts you put in me, and you can use them now through me in my next season when I am no longer in my present title. God, I'm available. You see, this is a critical part of your own personal self-preparation. Because remember, step aside graciously. Then launch out into your new season in a very powerful way. Because if you are right, if you do it right, the best is yet to come.
Wow, what an incredible word from Naomi Dowdy. I have no doubt that you were blessed and enriched by the wisdom that she shared. So much wisdom that comes from her own experience. That's not just something that comes out of a book, but that comes from somebody who's lived it and done it. It's a huge part of our heart here at Destiny Fellowship to see churches successfully transition from one generation to the next. We believe with all our heart that one of the things God's doing is allowing us to do that better. So I trust you were enriched by that. I want to remind you of something that's coming up on August the 20th. We have a one-day that's specially prepared for you with pastors and leaders in mind. We know this is a difficult time, an incredible time to be leading in church and in the kingdom, and we want to encourage, lift up the hands, speak life into pastors and leaders all across America and all across the world. So mark your calendar for August the 20th. Bishop Miller is going to be speaking and just bringing a word of encouragement and strategy to you. He's also got a word from our dear friend Stephen Furtick, who will be joining us on August 20th for a Leaders One Day. You can register at tonymiller.tv, so do that right now. Registration's free, but it's required. We hope to see you on August the 20th.